I am not going to teach you how to meditate. Learning to meditate properly is a serious matter. You can make a faltering start using books, DVDs, that sort of thing, but actually you need a teacher to work with you to start meditating properly. How important is meditation? It's extremely important. Okay? So this talk is simply about, rather than being instruction in, meditation or dhyana and samadhi. Dhyana comes from two Sanskrit words that literally means movement of the mind. You are directing the mind's movement. The mind is always active. Okay? Even when you're asleep, the mind is active. Meditation is a matter of learning to direct the movement of the mind, where you want it to go. Samadhi, we'll talk about later, is oneness with the divine. State of consciousness, which is oneness with the divine. Remember, the Atman is the Brahma. Okay? When that you fully become aware of that, you fully embody that, that is samadhi. A friend of mine is fond of quoting Maharshi Mahesh, who said, "What is it that knows samadhi? It is samadhi that knows samadhi. Nothing else can know samadhi." Okay? So the methods, breathing, of course, is at the core of most meditation because it is a way of calming the body and stilling the mind and focusing the attention. Simply breathing is only the preliminary step. There are various other things that help us to achieve the meditative state. Mantras are an important part of Hindu meditation. A mantra is not simply anything repeated again and again and again. Again, this is a term that's been vulgarized in the West to simply mean, okay, this is my slogan, you know. Mantra is actually a divine sound or divine name or part of a divine name that is repeated, because the idea is that there's certain sorts of vibrations set up in the mind, a harmony with the divine consciousness. This is an attempt to, if you will, tune your mind by the repetition of these divine names or sacred syllables. It's not that anything at all can serve as a mantra, which is another reason why, if you're going to do mantra yoga, you really ought to be initiated in that by someone who knows what he or she is doing, is familiar with how you assign a mantra to a person and what that mantra does for you. For a while, there was a form of meditation that was very popular in the United States called transcendental meditation. It's still around, although not as vigorous as it once was. And that was entirely mantra yoga. You undergo an initiation ceremony where your teacher assigns you a mantra that's supposed to be appropriate for you. You don't tell that to anyone else. Why? Because it's a big secret? No, because if you tell someone else your mantra, that person may start trying to use that mantra, and that mantra wasn't necessarily appropriate for the other person. Okay? Well, will I always have the same mantra? Well, no. You know, your teacher keeps close tabs on you, and at some point your mantra will change. It will evolve. Okay? You think about the repetition of a sound and how that helps to focus the mind. Well, now think about that repetition of the sound as not just being a random sound focusing the mind, but actually bringing our ordinary consciousness in harmony with God consciousness. Okay? Yantra is just like a mantra, but it's actually a visual shape, you know, some sort of mandala or some sort of icon or some sort of diagram or whatever that does exactly the same purpose. Focuses the mind on some aspect of the divine, but does it visually rather than through sound. Okay? Very often a mantra and a yantra will be used in combination. But we'll talk about Tantra later, and you know, Tantra makes a great deal of use of yantras. Okay? And finally, absorption. These are esoteric practices. Know the difference, if I haven't mentioned it before, or if you don't know, the difference between exoteric and esoteric. Exoteric means it's for everybody. Esoteric means it's only for those who have been initiated, those who already have some kind of understanding to use as a basis. There are all kinds of esoteric practices. where essentially consciousness becomes absorbed into itself. And again, that's the kind of thing that you don't start off doing. You do it after you've had sufficient instruction and you're sufficiently grounded in your practice. There are other things that can help us in this. Chanting. Chanting is very important, and again, the idea of the sacred sounds, the sacred syllables, the sacred scriptures and so forth being repeated in a way that it sort of creates a harmony that brings the mind into a peaceful state. That's behind the chanting. It's not just a matter of, okay, we're going to chant these particular Vedic scriptures every morning so we don't forget them, although that's part of it traditionally. You chant the Vedic scriptures because just the sound acts as, if you will, a prolonged kind of mantra. And music, okay? Sacred music. You've heard sitar music before, or other kinds of Indian music. You know there are microtones. There's generally a harmonic drone in the background. And that's basically to create a psychic space. Okay? The American composer John Cage, who actually was a Zen Buddhist, did a famous piano piece in which the piano player comes out, sits down at the piano, and after I think it's 3 minutes and I don't remember how many seconds, he just gets up and leaves, and he's not touched the piano. People, of course, said this was fraud or this was, avant-garde nonsense or whatever. But as he explained it, it was a matter of we never have a still and silent mind when we listen to music. And what he wanted to do with that piece was make people aware of the psychic space in which they hear music. Okay? So, essentially, Indian music, particularly sacred music, creates that sonic space in which we then hear. The raga means literally passion or emotion. Indian music is very consciously supposed to be the expression of feelings. Okay, we feel the devotional feelings, we feel the height of ecstasy, or the depths of profound despair and so forth. The whole human experience comes through the music. Okay? So of course, that makes you much more aware of your mind, allows you to absorb deeply into your mind and to become silent, poised, and detached. Detached in what sense? Detached in the sense that you're not all tangled up in this narrative that's always going through your mind. There's a scene in the film, a Julia Roberts film based on the Elizabeth Gilbert book, Eat, Pray, Love. And yes, I admit I did see a Julia Roberts film in the theater. But there's a scene where she's in India and she's at an ashram and she's trying to learn to meditate, and she's just going through all kinds of agony trying to get her mind to shut up. She looks up at the clock and it's only been less than 5 minutes, and she's in despair, and she says, "How can it be so hard to think of nothing?" Well, try it. That's a sense of detachment. You are not the slave of this chaos running randomly through your mind. You realize that you are actually in the driver's seat. Okay? Dhyana is movement of the mind. The practice of meditation puts you in a place of peace. It awakens energy, which is a very important part of the spiritual life. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "I am always active." Fearlessness. What makes us afraid is that we identify the ego with our real self. And so we're constantly trying to get things for the ego or avoid harm to the ego when we realize that we are in fact the Brahma. The Atman is the Brahma. We have fearlessness. If we have fearlessness, we can do what needs to be done. An uninterrupted God consciousness, which is what Samadhi is. Now, what does that mean? Well, usually we're looking at this small self, the ego, and totally involved with it, and totally attached with it, and that's all we see, and we mistake it as being real, rather than as something that that is part of Maya, part of this illusion. If we can dissolve that small self, the ego, that leaves only this great self, the Atman. Socrates sometimes described what he did as clearing away the debris that's in front of your eyes so that you can see for yourself clearly. There's a sense in which that's exactly what happens in meditation. You're clearing away the psychic debris so that you can see who you really are. Okay. Now I should, while we're on this topic, mention the sacred syllable Om. Again, this is something that's entered into popular culture in the West, and very often people don't have any clue what it is. A Unitarian minister, actually she wasn't really Unitarian, she was a Universal Church minister, that's what it was, which I think is different because you just send away $200 and you get your certificate. She said, oh, I know what Om is. It's the universal name of God. I said, no. Okay, what is Om? Sanskrit is, the Sanskrit language is a beautiful blending of sounds. It is utterly phonetic. Every letter and every variation on a letter corresponds to some part of the body that makes that sound. It is very physical. Okay? When you have complex sounds, complex vowels and so forth, that is a combination of sounds, it's represented as not independent letters so much as just simply, oh, here is a variation on this. We're putting these sounds together. We're moving to a different part of the mouth or the palate or the throat or whatever to make that sound. The syllable Om is a combination of sounds that start in the belly, go up through the chest, and finally through the head. Okay, and that does correspond with the notion of the chakras or the energy centers. You're unifying them. I mean, it's not in sequence, they are together, sort of radiating. Om is the primal syllable. It's considered to, when viewed as a sacred syllable, it is considered to contain all the other sacred syllables. In fact, this is the sound that issues from the mind of God and brings everything into creation. The various gods and goddesses are sometimes called Omkara, which essentially means they are begotten of Om. Okay, so when people think that they are meditating, they're sitting around just simply going Om, and they have no idea what it means, and they have basically no idea of how to approach it. It's not like a magic word, like you say abracadabra and the rabbit appears out of the hat. Just saying the syllable without understanding, without absorption, without mental poise is not going to do for you what meditation was traditionally supposed to do. Now, I should mention, simply because this is a fact, that as with most religions, particularly archaic religions and non-Western religions and indigenous religions, the use of psychotropic substances is very much a part of the practice of some, but not by any means the majority, of Hindus. The earliest Vedas, the Rig Veda and so forth, speak of soma. Soma is something that is consumed by the priests so that they can have visions, so that they can do the fire sacrifice, so they can talk to the gods and so forth. As far as scientists have been able to ascertain, soma was actually a hallucinogenic mushroom. Okay? Well, what's the point of taking a hallucinogenic mushroom? If you're not doing it just to entertain yourself, you're doing it because it vividly demonstrates to you that your ordinary consciousness is just one kind of consciousness. This ordinary way of seeing the world isn't all there is. There's more. Okay? Your consciousness has infinite possibilities that we don't ordinarily see. The sadhus, the people who live in the forest, living very austere lives, eating practically nothing, doing very torturous physical exercises, hanging from hooks and so forth, those people basically are trying to completely dominate the body with the mind, so that the mind becomes so much stronger than the body that no physical pain or physical desire can overwhelm their concentration. They very frequently smoke ganja. I think the only place where ganja has not historically been frequently spoken is Antarctica. The fact is, it's essentially the same way. It's a kickstart. It is not itself samadhi. It is not necessary for samadhi. It is not a substitute for samadhi. For some people who are already doing the rest of this stuff, it's a kickstart. It's just one more thing that helps. And in fact, people who use hallucinogenic substances whether it's in the Hindu tradition or shamanic traditions around the world, generally feel that there is the presence of a god in that substance, which they are opening themselves to. Okay, as I say, that's quite a bit different from simply smoking marijuana or taking a hallucinogenic drug just to amuse yourself. That's not what it's for. That's not what it's for. It's to open doors for you. As Aldous Huxley put it in his famous essay, The Doors of Perception. Okay. Now, let me throw the disclaimer on this that I've used before. Don't try this at home. Don't think that if you sit home and get stoned, you're going to see God. You might fool yourself into thinking that, in which case that's a huge setback, because now for all this you've substituted an illusion. You see why it's so important to have a guru, and for your guru to actually have integrity and wisdom. Okay, someone's got to guide you through this very tricky spiritual landscape if you're going to continue to make progress.